All right, we are live. Good morning, everyone. Our first sort of summerish day in Chicago. I want to welcome everybody this morning to those who are attending the RTA's meeting of the Board of Directors and want to review a few guidelines for our meeting. For the members who are in person, please turn on your microphones when you wish to speak and remember to try to turn them off when you're finished so we can limit the microphones to one at a time. And I'll call on those persons with questions or comments for those who are here physically. For those calling in remotely, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which may impair the recording. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand, and our amazingly efficient board secretary will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, try to remember, and I'm someone who doesn't always remember, lower your hand and unmute before you speak. With that now said, I will call a meeting of the most efficient historically mass transit system in America and the lowest state funded to order. And we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll, and thanks for having the air conditioning on today.
Good morning, everyone. Director Carey?
Here.
Director Colson?
Here.
Director Gathing? Director Gorman?
Here.
Director Groven?
Here.
Director Jenkins?
Here.
Director Katarik?
Here.
Director Lewis? Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Pang? Director Rotondo?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Ryan?
Here.
Director Sager? Director Yonan?
Here.
Chairman Dillard?
Present.
We have 12 here.
Great, thank you. Now that we have established that we have a physical quorum and our board secretary has received completed notice from Director Jenkins that she cannot attend in person pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, she is deemed admitted unless there's a motion against it. Hearing none, Director Jenkins, Tasha, you may participate remotely, and thank you for being on. I apologize for not wearing a tie today, although it's 90 degrees, but I have a raspy throat on medication for it, not contagious, but not gonna squeeze it any more than I have to because I want to keep my voice during these last couple of weeks of the General Assembly's important session in Springfield. And my wife asked if I had ever missed a meeting, and I've never missed a meeting of the RTA. So, and wouldn't think of doing it today. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on April 17th, 2025. Any comments or corrections on those? If not, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the minutes as submitted. Director Rotondo moves, seconded by Director Yonan, that we approve the minutes of the April 17th of 2025. And Joy, take a roll call, please.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Gathing? Director Gorman?
Here. Aye.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katarik?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Pang? Director Rotondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Sager? Director Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Present.
You have 12 ayes.
Thank you. And the minutes from our last meeting are approved. Item 4 is the public comment segment of the meeting. Any comments received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Is there anybody that has sent in written comments?
We have received no written comments.
All right. And anybody out in the audience that wishes to speak during the public comments segment today? Seeing none, thank you. And thank you for the audience for being out there in attendance. And I do see, and they're most appreciated, some of the operators of some of our wonderful bus and L equipment out there. So thank you so much for what you do every day. Item 5, the Executive Director's Report, Leanne Redden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Board of Directors. Busy agenda, so I'll just jump in with a quick update. First, want to let you know that the RTA's $130 million 2025A bond series that we talked about with you the other month. That's going to fund a variety of metro projects, including new diesel, battery-powered locomotives, as well as station, substation, and train yard renovations. Those bonds received ratings of AA+ from Fitch and AA from S&P. Moody's affirmed its AA3 rating of the RTA's outstanding bonds also. Of the 7 bids that we received, Bank of America Securities submitted the lowest bid. And despite recent volatility in the capital markets and the impending fiscal cliff, the market still views RTA as very strong credit. Next month, we will be presenting the 2026 budget call, outlining the budget's middle requirements for the upcoming budget year with the service boards. As in previous years, we've also engaged Moody's Analytics to provide a forecast and analysis of sales tax performance and expected sort of growth or changes for the future year. Their latest analysis, which we just got in, adjusts the 2025 sales tax growth downward to 1.6%. Moody's also provided a recession scenario, projecting declines of 25 million in 2025 and 60 million in 2026, even accounting for a stronger 2024 baseline. This analysis aligns with this week's Governor's Office of Management and Budget update that was also covered in the media, which anticipates lower state revenues in the upcoming fiscal year. So at the June board meeting here, we, as I just mentioned, will outline the requirements for the budget submittal based on this information and informed by any course of action that Springfield will take later this month. And I think those of you who've been on the board for a while know we normally kick off the budget process with the service boards in May, but we consciously chose to delay it till June so we had a better sense of what those outlooks might look like. I know at least some of you were also able to attend the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce event on May 5. The chairman participated in a panel that focused on transit and the fiscal cliff, which was part of their Chicago at a Crossroads series. The panel included Carol Brown, former CFO of the City of Chicago and former chair of the CTA board, as well as representatives from the Harris Poll, who shared their insights from a recent survey they did of the Chicago area business leaders. The poll found wide support for the system and overall satisfaction with it, but unsurprisingly, less support for increasing taxes to fund it. Again, that was a business member poll. Despite that, this forum made clear that the business community is aware of both the benefits of the transit system to our regional economy and the consequences of inaction. So next slide, please. There we go. As usual, you're going to hear from Rob Nash in a couple of moments, focused on the work happening down in Springfield. So I'll just focus on the federal agenda, as well as some other successful local outreach unrelated to everything in Springfield. On April 30, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure adopted its budget reconciliation proposal on a party line vote. The bill imposes an electric vehicle fee and rescinds certain U.S. DOT unobligated funds, including equity, low carbon, and environmental review funds. The new electric vehicle fee would incentivize states to collect an annual fee of $250 on electric vehicles and $100 on hybrid vehicles indexed to inflation. The new revenue is to be deposited into the Highway Trust Fund. However, unlike prior Highway Trust Fund revenues since 1982, this proposal does not allocate any of those new funds towards transit. RTA staff will communicate the importance of maintaining and growing the share of the Highway Trust Fund, funds allocated to transit infrastructure as this proposal advances. On May 2nd, the Office of Management and Budget sent President Trump's top-line discretionary budget request to the U.S. Congress, And the budget proposal reduces non-defense discretionary spending by about 23% and increases defense spending by 13%. Trump's request for USDOT includes increases in aviation, port infrastructure, rail safety, and overall infrastructure spending. The budget proposes several billion in cuts to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, specifically in the advanced appropriations funding. But the specific nature of these cuts is really yet to be determined, and we will likely be included, hopefully, in the more detailed budget that should be forthcoming soon. Staff will monitor the development of those proposals and ensure that the Illinois delegation is aware of our concerns, specifically around the transit funding needs. On the local front, government affairs staff and staff from our mobility department recently partnered to provide information sessions to legislators and their staff on the free and reduced fare programs, the paratransit services available to residents of the region. This effort reached nearly 50 legislative offices throughout the region, and the sessions were very well received, and all the offices that we are now in regular communication with on these programs all attended at least one of those sessions. So next slide. So just a quick run through on today's agenda. Following this, we'll hear an update on the most recent meeting of the RTA Citizens Advisory Board from its new chair, Ryan Ruley, who is a lead planner at the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways. Sorry, John. After Ryan's report, you will get an update from our community planning team on this year's call for project selection. And then a report from capital planning, including an overview of the 2025 asset condition report and the performance-based allocation process that we want feedback from you on. Our last informational item will be an update on the strategic plan implementation, and then we'll ask for your votes on 5 items that include the resolution on the financial results for Q1 of 2025, the ADA paratransit funding amendment, ordinances authorizing a contract for fare program administration and for the purchase of excess liability insurance coverage, and then finally some travel expense reimbursements. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I am happy to answer any questions and turn it back to you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for our executive director? I would just add on the bond sale, AA+ stable in a state like Illinois is essentially the highest rating you're going to get. And Wall Street believes that we are doing an excellent job. Our outlook is stable in a pretty unstable environment economically and nationally, and even from Springfield. 30 years in a row, the RTA has received from the Government Finance Officers Association its top rating for the way we handle finances. We've never had a shutdown of our system since the creation of the RTA, unlike a lot of other cities. And we have balanced our budget every year despite $400 million in recent reductions in transit funding from Springfield. So don't take it from me, take it from Wall Street, that what we as the RTA are charged to do gets its highest marks from the Wall Street professionals of 3 different firms. With that, item 6A, I want to welcome the new Citizens Advisory Board Chair, Ryan Ruley. Welcome. Thank you for taking on this task, Ryan. And welcome. And we look forward to seeing you like month after month right there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the Board of Directors. Thank you for your time this morning. My name is Ryan Ruley. I'm currently serving as the chair of the RTA CAB. Since our former chair, Jackie Forbes, stepped down recently due to a change in her employment. I was told that the board here recognized Jackie for her service at the February meeting. I would like to echo that sentiment as well. We'll, of course, miss Jackie, but wish her all the best of luck in her new capacity. And for a bit more context on my background, my role at the RTA CAB includes serving as the suburban Cook County representative, and I recently vacated the role of vice chair upon becoming chair. As Leanne mentioned, I also serve as lead planner for the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways, where I've been for the past 2 years with the Strategic Planning and Policy Bureau. In addition to the county, I've spent most of the past 2 decades in various transportation planning roles, most recently at Pace Suburban Bus, as well as private consulting firms previously. And as someone who has been riding the transit system that entire time and passionate about bolstering it, I'm happy to be here this morning to represent the RTA CAB and convey the discourse and interests of its members to the RTA board. Also want to announce a couple of other membership changes at the RTA CAB. First, Heidi Files, Chief of Planning and Programming at the Kane County Division of Transportation, has joined the CAB as the Kane County representative and filled the vacancy left by Jackie. And second, the vice chair role has been filled by Jasmine Vega with the McHenry County Division of Transportation, who has been serving as the McHenry County representative on the CAB. And we're happy to have them both serving in these new capacities. With that, I'll move on to provide you with a report on the activities of the RTA CAB. Our last meeting was held on Monday, April 28th, 2025, during which CAB members and RTA staff provided presentations on 3 important topics, which I will briefly summarize. For the first presentation, CAB member Lauren Gutierrez, representing the network advocating against domestic violence, provided the presentation on the outcomes of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault RTA Public Transportation Assistance Program pilot. Ms. Gutierrez described how venture cards are being distributed to survivors, the demographics of the survivors who receive the cards, the types of trip purposes and ways in which the program participants are using those cards, and some feedback from the survivors on how the program has positively impacted their lives. Ms. Gutierrez concluded by discussing recommendations on how the program can be enhanced. Our second presenter at last month's meeting was Peter Kirsten, Manager of Strategy and Policy. Mr. Kirsten provided an overview of the Service Board responses to RTA Board Resolution 2025-01, passed by the RTA Board in January of 2025. And he indicated that RTA has been working to provide quantitative details on the consequences of the fiscal cliff in collaboration with Metro Pace and CTA. Potential impacts covered both what could happen if the new funding is not realized, as well as how the system could be enhanced if funding is realized. We learned about possible budget balancing actions, such as fare increases and service cuts in the first scenario, before pivoting to the vision for how a $1.5 billion state investment could benefit transit operations and service frequency, as well as the potential efficiencies that could be realized. And lastly, we heard from Kyle Whitehead, Principal of Government Affairs, and Tina Smith, Director of Communications, who jointly presented a recap of the Transforming Transit Summit that occurred on April 15th, and to announce the launch of the Save Transit Now campaign. Mr. Whitehead reported that the purpose of the summit was to discuss the future of the region's transit system with a diverse audience of state legislators, transit agency leadership and staff, local officials, business community advocates, and riders. The event focused on how sustainable funding could unlock areas that could increase efficiency and accountability for legislators and taxpayers. Ms. Smith then discussed the purpose of the Save Transit Now campaign, showed the RTA CAB members the 30-second commercial, and detailed other outreach strategies RTA is conducting on this topic. RTA CAB members were very engaged throughout each of these 3 presentations. Members asked if the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault RTA Public Transportation Assistance Program pilot would become a permanent RTA fare program, as there was widespread agreement on the importance of this initiative. Ms. Gutierrez stated that they are working with lawmakers to advance legislation to make the program permanent. Members also expressed interest in promoting the Save Transit Now campaign, and staff committed to providing a flyer for them to distribute and aid in their efforts to amplify RTA's message. The next meeting of the RTA CAB will be held on Monday, July 28th, 2025, from 10 a.m. until noon right here in this room. Going forward, I will continue to provide the board a summary of our meetings on a quarterly basis. And that concludes my reports, and I'd be happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Any questions or comments, suggestions? Again, thank you for stepping up to take over this important role, and we look forward to seeing you again and again. Thanks.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
All right, item 6B.
Chairman, I'd like to
Yes.
note that Director Pang has joined as well as
Excellent.
Director Gabbing.
Director Sarah Pang will be added to the role, as will Director Jamie Gathing. Thank you. Stepping up to the microphone for item 6B is the community planning update. Michael Horsting, welcome, and it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be with you as always. We're sharing with you this morning an update on the annual community planning program and our call for projects and the results of that call that we had earlier this year. But just a little bit of program history. If we go to the next slide, please. For 27 years now, the RTA has been supporting local governments across the region in planning for transit supportive land use near their transit services. Through the community planning program, we provide technical assistance to conduct transit-focused planning studies that advance the RTA strategic plan. And by providing local governments with the assistance needed to complete plans as well as support to implement those plans, the work of the RTA helps municipalities in the region develop neighborhoods and downtowns near transit stations and along bus routes that offer a mix of land uses at appropriate development densities that are walkable, accessible, and advanced sustainable modes of transportation. Next slide, please. The types of assistance that we offer through the program really fall into two different categories: those that develop a brand new plan and a vision for the future, and then those that implement a plan that already exists. Under planning, equitable transit-oriented development plans, or ETOD plans, are offered to create a vision for compact development styles with a mixture of land uses and high-quality environments for accessing transit. And when implemented, municipalities can achieve that walkable nature, mixed-use uses centered on transit that supports the daily needs of riders. Transit corridor plans identify ways to attract more people to travel the corridor using transit by strategizing improved transit operations, access for people that are walking or using a bicycle, and identifying land use and design policy strategies that are more pedestrian and transit friendly. With the RTA's commitment supporting municipal efforts to improve accessibility around transit services, we offer neighborhood access to transit improvement plans that examine the level of access at a transit stop or station and develop a list of detailed infrastructure improvements designed to increase the reach and accessibility of transit. And fourth, curb management studies explore the use of curb space in transit-served areas and create recommendations to better manage that growing and competing need for curb space, all while prioritizing bus and rail access. So finally, the RTA provides various types of assistance that support some of the most common plan recommendations, such as updating a municipal zoning code, establishing a special financing district, and pairing municipalities with members of the private development community who offer feedback to them on their economic development strategies near transit. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Every year, we complete an annual report that really serves as a summary of previous year's awards and recent activities related to the program, as well as the Access to Transit program. The 2024 report highlights new projects, 8 new projects that began last year, 8 projects that were already underway and then completed last year, and also demonstrates the program's impact on regional economic development by telling the story of various municipalities who are implementing plans completed through the RTA. And we wanted to provide a few examples to you of that. In May of last year, the village of Fox River Grove began demolition of a series of buildings it acquired to foster redevelopment of 9 parcels across the street from the village's metro station. Demolition of the underutilized buildings implements recommendations from the RTA's Fox River Grove Station Area Planning Study to construct mixed-use development at that site. In July, the village of Bellwood broke ground on a pair of 4-story apartment buildings that straddle St. Charles Road at 28th Avenue. This project was envisioned in the RTA's St. Charles Road Corridor Study and will result in 71 apartments and 6,000 square feet of commercial space along the corridor served by Pace Bus. And in October, the City of Chicago City Council approved a 71-unit affordable housing development for seniors on East 53rd Street between the 51st and the Garfield Green Line stations. This project implements recommendations from an economic development action guide created by the RTA and will result in a 6-story building with studio, 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. So I invite you to navigate to the community planning page and look for this report on our website. Next slide, please. So moving into this year, the RTA held its annual call for projects from March 10 until April 4, in partnership again with CMAP, resulting in 14 applications for assistance. RTA staff reviewed and researched each application, interviewed the applicants, solicited feedback, on each from the service boards as well as other partnering agencies in the region, and really evaluated the applications based on their alignment with our strategic plan, on the feasibility of the proposed project, and really the capacity of the applicant to partner with us. Next slide, please. So after reviewing all 14 applications, staff is advancing 9 into the 2025 Community Planning Program of projects. These first 4 projects listed here focus on developing a land use and transportation plan for the future. First off, we'll partner with the Chicago Department of Planning and Development to create an equitable TOD plan for the areas surrounding the Belmont Blue Line station in the Avondale community. The goals of this plan are to align with the city's desire to bring residential developments to areas which need affordable housing the most, identify improvements to accessing transit, and develop a vision with increased development densities near the station, along with supporting commercial uses. We'll partner with the villages of Evergreen Park and Oak Lawn to study the 95th Street corridor from Western to Harlem Avenues. This corridor covers 6 miles of PACE's future Pulse 95th line, and the plan will address transportation safety alongside future land use and economic development opportunities that will attract new investment to these future Pulse station areas. The city of Harvard and the RTA will develop an equitable TOD plan for their downtown area. The city envisions a stronger core downtown for Harvard, one that will spur residential and commercial growth that is centered on transit and will improve bicycle and pedestrian access to the metro station and the bus routes serving their community. And we'll partner with the city of Oak Forest to complete a study of their metro station area with the goal to address safety challenges related to accessibility, and while setting a new direction for future investment and development that will bring new jobs centered on the city's transit services. Next slide, please. The next 3 projects have a focus on transportation strategies and developing those strategies. We will support the city of Aurora's efforts to explore the feasibility of expanding bus services along key routes and to key destinations within the city. This initiative seeks to bolster ridership without placing additional financial strain on the existing regional system, while working towards the city's primary goal to reduce the number of individuals traveling to key destinations alone on a daily basis. The RTA and the Chicago Department of Transportation will prepare a neighborhood access to transit plan for 3 stations on the Blue Line Forest Park branch. These stations serve several diverse communities with many residents who solely rely on transit for their daily mobility. And CDOT plans to identify mobility improvements such as sidewalk, curb cut needs, pedestrian crossings, wayfinding signage, and other access improvements that better facilitate bus to rail transfers. These 3 stations, by the way, are Cicero, Kedzie-Homan, and Western. Last on this list, the RTA and DuPage County's Department of Transportation will convene a variety of county agencies and transportation partners to conduct a planning study on ways to further coordinate or potentially consolidate dial-a-ride services in the county. Next slide, please. And finally, these last 2 projects will work towards implementing plans that are already underway and about to be completed or that already exist. We'll partner with the Village of Fox Lake to update their municipal zoning code in the downtown area. Goals of the revised code are to better connect downtown and the metro station area to the lakefront, create a more appealing downtown for residents, reduce commercial vacancy rates, and redevelop underutilized and vacant sites near transit to bring more housing and walkability to the area. And finally, we'll continue our partnership that's ongoing right now with the city of Joliet to update their municipal zoning code in areas surrounding the Gateway Transportation Center. Their existing code restricts multifamily housing in portions of downtown without a special use permit, and it also perpetuates incompatible low-density housing near transit. So this effort will modify the existing code to allow the types and styles of development that are currently envisioned in the Joliet E2D plan, which is just wrapping up right now through our program. Next slide, please. So in summary, these 9 new projects offer new opportunities for staff and our team to work in each of the RTA's 6 counties, providing communities with planning and implementation assistance, as well as interagency expertise that can strengthen their capacity and help them leverage the region's transit network. And next slide. Finally, next steps. After today's meeting, we will post these 9 new projects to our website and open up a public comment period, which will run through the end of the month. And then barring any changes as a result of those comments, we'll notify applicants of their award in our new partnership in June, begin to scope those projects, enter into necessary agreements that are needed this summer, and then we plan to have all 9 new projects underway by the end of the year. So this concludes our presentation this morning. Happy to answer any comments or questions.
Thank you. Oh, any questions or comments? Director Yonan.
Thank you, Chairman. This is really exciting. Thank you for, again, the due diligence and the team that made the selections on these projects. I know sometimes when, obviously with the 14 applications, those that maybe, weren't, able to become successful applicants, what are you doing to just kind of help maybe coach some of those along? Obviously, you want to keep the momentum out there and folks who feel like that probably was the best project that they could come up with, but perhaps as it misses the mark, I know, again, to keep this robust and more applications going, sometimes reaching back out and coaching them into, future applications and a better way to do it. But curious just to know what you're going to do with some of the other applicants that weren't successful this round.
Yeah, thanks for that, Director Yonan. That's exactly what we do. So many of the projects aren't quite a great fit for our program. There's perhaps a lack of a transit focus. And so we help them walk through what a better application could look like for next year. And we provide them a little coaching, a little better understanding of our program. And through that process, we then frequently will generate an application for next year's program for our consideration. But also to that, the beauty of partnering with CMAP on this particular call for projects is some of these applications that aren't quite the best fit for us are a good fit for CMAP. For example, one application we are not awarding this year through our program is an application from Calumet Park to analyze some of their corridors in their community. Great fit for CMAP and their goals. It was less of a transit focus for us, and so we were shifting that one off to CMAP.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with my second point here is obviously there aren't losers in this, that ability to be able to put a project out there and the partnerships that you had just mentioned, in this case, CMAP, perhaps some of the counties that could pick up some of that, just having that out there, is again, just exactly where I was going with this and appreciate that feedback. So thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Director Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a chance to attend the open house that was held in Joliet last night. Very, very well attended. The mayor and the council people that I spoke to were very grateful for this second opportunity now to do something with the zoning. The plan of work that was displayed last night had lots of input, a lot of exciting ideas. The community in general, I'd say, was very happy and very excited about the things that have been proposed, and they're grateful to the RTA for the funding and also for the technical assistance.
Great. Thank you for attending that event last night. I'm happy to hear that. And Mayor Darcy and his staff have been a pleasure to work with, and we're just really excited to continue that partnership.
He was absolutely excited about the second opportunity.
Excellent. Excellent.
It's great. Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very, very much. Okay, 6C is a capital programming update on the 2025 asset condition report and performance-based allocation process. And Malik and Evan and Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the board. Malik Vaishnav, Senior Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming. I'll kick us off for this informational update on our capital programming, and then turn it over to my team to give you a little bit more detail on each item. So today we will cover, next slide, please, an overview of RTA's work in collaboration with CTA, Metro, and PACE on documenting our assets. As you know, we are a legacy system with a lot of older assets. Their useful life, cost estimates to bring them to a state of good repair, And this work is called Strategic Asset Management, or SAM. It not only informs our capital needs moving forward, but also forms as a basis for updating some of the capital funding splits between CTM, Metra, and PACE. So objective use of data and performance measures to allocate funding allows us to focus on our most pressing needs, such as bringing older assets to a state of good repair. Additionally, you will hear about our proposal to fully implement performance-based programming. For those members who were here back in 2021, RTA went through the first phase of implementing performance-based programming, but due to COVID, we did not implement some parts of it. So in the memo and in this conversation, we are looking for your feedback, and we'll open it up for public comment as well. We have met with service boards since January to discuss the potential changes that are included in the memo to the 2021 process. We will make sure after the public comment, we come back to you for a vote as part of the budget marks, which will likely be in August. Even though the memo mentions July, it'll likely be August. So with that, I'll first turn it over to Evan to discuss our update to the asset management report. Next slide.
Thank you, Malik. Good morning. My name is Evan Laugen. I'm a strategic analyst with our strategy and policy team. So the first principle of our capital allocation is to prioritize state of good repair. To that end, we use the 20-year state of good repair metric to determine the baseline allocation of funds. This measure estimates the amount of funding each service board would need to reach a state of good repair of all assets within 20 years. The proportion of need makes up the initial funding split. The 20-year state of good repair need is developed through the SAM working group, which earlier this year completed the first update of the capital asset condition data since 2016. The data are analyzed through a decision support tool we call COST. The SAM working group is led by RTA with the collaboration of staff from each of the service boards. Next slide, please. Our cost optimization tool uses each asset's replacement value, current condition, and expected useful life to prioritize capital investment. We ran the cost tool to create an investment profile to bring all of the assets to a state of good repair in 20 years, and cost identified the funding needed to do that. Our data show that 25% of the region's transit assets currently exceed their useful life. The total backlog of regional capital investment is approximately $30 billion, a result of many decades of inadequate capital funding. Since we cannot realistically clear the backlog instantaneously, we calculated that reaching a state of good repair for the region would require capital investment of $4 billion each year for the next 20 years. Our last asset condition assessment was in 2016, before Rebuild Illinois or federal infrastructure funding was made available. Since that report, the percent of assets exceeding useful life declined from 31% to 25%. However, inflationary pressures have impacted the replacement costs since 2016. In that year, the total backlog was calculated at $19 billion in 2015 dollars, and the annual investment needed to reach a state of good repair was $2.6 billion each year for 20 years. Next slide, please. This slide documents the details of asset categories exceeding useful life in 2016 versus now. All 5 asset categories recorded decreases. This was a result of significant investments in capital improvements by the service boards over this time, made possible by increased capital funding. In particular, the positive impact of the state bond and PAYGO funding from Rebuild Illinois has improved the condition of the region's transit assets. Next slide, please. The 20-year investment needs to bring each service board's assets to a state of good repair are shown here. This represents the need for a $4 billion annual investment, which is 4 times the current level of approximately $1 billion annual investment. This metric of the investment need is used within performance-based programming for capital funding allocation, which Brian Lowenberg will now discuss.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Evan. I'm Brian Lowenberg, Manager of Capital Programs. Now let's talk about the performance-based funding allocation method that is used to program and allocate federal formula and PAYGO funds between CTA, METRA, and PACE. Historically, RTA used fixed percentages to allocate federal formula and PAYGO funds. Starting back in 2019, RTA Board commissioned a performance-based capital allocation process to replace the old formulas. In 2020, a draft framework was published that included key items that should be looked at as part of performance-based programming. In 2021, RTA worked with the service boards on a performance-based allocation methodology, and an agreement was reached to allocate funding and brought to the July 2021 board for approval. The agreement did not include a method to reallocate any funds within the methodology. Withholdings were paused during the COVID crisis, which brings us to today. We'll look at some changes to the withholding calculations and propose principles for redistributing these withheld funds. In addition, we plan to open this proposal for comment, as Malik mentioned. We plan to include the final proposal as part of the capital marks approval that will include new withholdings calculations. Next slide, please. Let's walk through performance-based programming. The methodology came into full effect with the 2025 funds, which were programmed in the 2021 to 2025 capital program. Funding includes federal formula funds and state PAYGO funds from the motor fuel tax. For 2025, a total of just over $1 billion were allocated based on performance-based programming. Next slide, please. Now let's look at how performance-based programming works. Can we go back one slide, please? The methodology uses 3 goals to achieve an equitable funding split. The first principle is to address capital reinvestment need. To that end, we use the 20-year state of good repair metric, which Evan discussed, to determine the baseline allocation of funds. This measure estimates the amount of funding each service board would need to reach a state of good repair of all assets within 20 years. The proportion of need makes up the initial split. Next slide, please. The second principle is to incentivize faster completion of projects. 50% of funds are allocated based on the 20-year state of good repair needs percentages, and then are incremented based on 2 measures: average age of funds, which has a goal to be under 2.5 years, and percent of funds spent, with a goal of spending at least 20% of available funds annually. Both metrics are built on 3-year averages. Service boards that meet the performance measures have no change to their available funding. If a measure is not met, funds are withheld for future reallocation. As noted, this reallocation method has yet to be determined, and so to date, no funds have been withheld. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at these 2 measures that I mentioned. First is the average age of funds. The goal of the average age of funds is 2.5 years or less, based on the 3-year average. On this slide, we have highlighted years where service boards have not met the goal. You can see that before 2020, all service boards were not meeting the mark. In 2020, with the addition of Rebuild Illinois funds, many new dollars came online and averages dramatically decreased. You can see that averages have begun to rise for service boards that are slower at spending Rebuild Illinois funds. Next slide, please. Now let's look at percent of funds spent. The goal of this measure is at least 20% of available funds are spent annually. For this measure, we look at CTA spending with and without debt service. You can see for this measure, percent of funds spent has declined with the addition of Rebuild Illinois and IIJA federal funds. All 3 service boards missed the mark in 2021, 2022, and 2023 when not including debt service spending. You can see that CTA spending has rebounded to above the 20% mark, while in 2024, Metro's average has begun to increase as well. Next slide, please. The final prong of performance-based capital allocation is that a minimum 20% of the value of the projects must meet one of the regional policy priorities, accessibility or equity. The service boards submit these projects as part of the capital program submittals and are presented to the board as part of the regional budget annually. These priorities can change each year based on evaluations of regionally important investment themes, but have remained the same over the first 5 years of the process. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see the percent of funds that would have been withheld from each service board for capital years 2025 through 2030. For 2030, which the proposed changes would apply to, the withholding amounts before adjustment are projected at 0 for CTA, 14.3 million or 3.76% for METRA, and 4.8 million or 6.85% for PACE. Next slide, please. Until now, we have calculated the potential withholdings and included the type of analysis you just saw in the annual budget documents. Staff is proposing that we fully implement performance-based programming in the upcoming budget cycle. We are proposing some changes to the calculations for these two measures. First, an exemption is proposed for up to 25% of annual PAYGO funds that are used to match federal discretionary grants. This exemption would allow service boards to use funds to attract additional funds to the region that might take longer to spend. Secondly, adjustments to the start date of projects will be considered when delays exceed 90 days and one of the following 4 criteria are met. Approval delays, such as permitting or NEPA, vendor delays documented in a change order, concurrence delays, and land acquisition delays. Next slide, please. Lastly, let's look at some details about how funds would be redistributed. The funds would be put into a pot for competitive project selection, and a selection would occur at a time that the pot reached at least $10 million. The service boards could apply for 1 to 3 key projects. The RTA board would set up priorities, and RTA staff would set up a scoring system that would be used in project selection. Priorities might include RTA-led regional application matches for competitive grants, regional projects that involve multiple service boards, or other goals such as climate or equity. Selection committee would be established to rank the projects, and funding would be awarded to top-ranked projects. To wrap up, again, we'll open this plan for public comment over the next weeks to gain feedback, and then we'll plan to incorporate this feedback and bring back to board approval as part of the marks. We're happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Any questions for the 3 gentlemen? Director Kotarik.
Thanks, Chairman. This is a really big deal. That was really dense. And I'd say that this is one of the most significant responsibilities that this board and agency has, is figuring out the distribution of the capital funding that comes to us. So just a couple fact check questions that I think are helpful for all of us. The funding distribution is our responsibility. There's no statutory requirement for us to distribute a certain percentage to any one service board. Is that right?
Correct. There have been different processes or decisions made over the years. For example, the bond funds were a one-time split. Then the PAYGO and federal formula are based on what you heard today. And all of that is updated based on the cycles we have set up. So they are all open to
Gotcha.
conversation.
So, and then the federal formula funds and the PAYGO funds on an annual basis, that's about $1 billion?
Correct, yeah. 740 for federal and 250-ish, so yeah.
So our job here is to distribute $1 billion a year. So this is a really, really, really significant responsibility. Previous to 2019, we distributed this how? On a formula basis, and what was the origins of that formula?
I can speak to that a little bit. A formula was developed 30 plus years ago. It was a fixed split for federal formula, and we used that split, as I said, for close to 30-something years.
Sure. So in a different way, it was a handshake political agreement that was made 40 plus years ago. Was that formula 58-34-8? 58 CTA, 34 Metra 8. And so I really want to applaud everyone here to take that on. I mean, I think that just the prudent and right thing to do from a planning perspective is to really interrogate that, think about it. And in 2019 and 2020, this board, really set that up. I do think this is worth some really, a deep dive for us to think about how we can do this better and to do this right. I think Director Mondero, who's brought up, the idea of committees or working groups for really substantive issues, this could be an excellent example of something, because for $1 billion a year, we really want to make sure we're getting this stuff right. Right now, we're using just pretty much 2 policy outcomes that we're driving, which is how fast are you spending the money and what is your current state of good repair? And so I think we could, in my opinion, a bit stale of the only 2 things that we should be looking at. There's a lot of other different policy outcomes that I think are important for this region: growing ridership, improving safety, addressing climate, economic growth, that I think should really be considered and thought about as we distribute funding. And I think this current proposal, even, we're getting to the point of pooling some funding. and thinking about competitive approaches to put a carrot out there to incentivize some action. But even in this proposal, it's just $10 million, which is, barely 1%. And the complicated way that we get there is through whether or not you've spent the funding fast enough. I mean, you could repave a parking lot really fast, and that'll increase your state of good repair for your facilities. That's a lot different than funding perhaps a planning project associated with the capital planning or the community planning that we just heard about. How are we incorporating that great work that we're doing and then putting the money where the priorities are that we help develop? I think that this could be a whole lot better. And really would encourage this board and us to take some time before we just sort of replicate what we had done during COVID and before the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed. We added another third of capital formula programs, so there's even more funding than we anticipated when this first came out. So, thanks.
Director Carey.
I agree with Director Katarik that this is a really big deal, and we have talked about it for some 4 or 5 years. So I think it is worthy of a lot of care and consideration and, excuse me, determining how we go forward from this point. I do want to point out that it isn't just how fast they spend the money. To get any capital projects during the budget process, they have to show that every project put forward, excuse me, complies, how it complies with the strategies in our strategic plan. So equity, climate, safety, all those things are in there. I would agree, and if a way forward is, as Director Mondero has put forth a couple times, put together a small group, or just bring it back to the whole board for further discussion. I think it is, I think we really need to, I guess, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit, but I think we need to wait and see what comes out of Springfield, though. That could change how we go forward from this. But I agree that it's a big deal. Thank you.
We are going to have working for sure.
Chairman, if I could jump in on a couple of items. I agree with you. The third prong we have of advancing policy priorities that currently has accessibility and equity, where 20% of the funding has to meet that. There's opportunities to beef that up where it could become a third real prong with state of good repair and the third priority. So we are open to suggestions there. And Director Carey, to your point, we didn't want to put out a call for budget for 2026 without implementing this. We didn't want to have another year of suggesting that we would not have a withholding. But at the same time, in 2 weeks, we may have a different outcome from Springfield. So both of those will have an impact on the final outcome. And we have a couple of months to figure that out.
And Malik, your service with the CTA is going to be really invaluable in the discussion process here. So you've really seen this with your sleeves rolled up. Director Yohan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director Katarik and Carey, for just, again, outlining the importance and the seriousness of this. And Chairman, as you said, just some committees that, need to discuss this because no question, $10 million doesn't sound like a lot, but yet, if that's potential for match on a federal grant that's going to come maybe to this region, make or break, change orders on our, almost $1.5 billion, investments and 2.5, $3 million of the red line extension. There's going to be a lot of folks saying you can't just keep the 10 million sitting there, right? So the temptations and or even just an application, again, been part of government that says, well, I'll really show them how important, this project is by applying for a one, grant that's going to bring, 80 cents on the dollar. So that's the fear sometimes of making, this such that it is spend it or it ends up in the pot that folks will, possibly look at some end arounds on this. And so the more we could be transparent about that, Again, in these committees, the discussions, I think there might be some exceptions at some point. I don't think anyone here would disagree. There might be that right project that says, why sit on 8 million if, we're not at that 10 threshold? Let's use that to bring some, additional funds in. So, it's great to have the guardrails on this, and important, and I agree it needs to get out this way, but it's just going to stir a lot of conversation in the future. And the more we can talk about that as a group, I think it's, that much more beneficial to everybody. So, thank you, Chairman.
Director Carey.
If I could just go back for a second, in response to something you said, Malik, I wouldn't want to put out the budget call. I mean, I understand, I said, let's wait till after Springfield makes a decision and let's take more time on it. But I would rather put something out as far as how we're going to allocate the money. And then we could go back and tweak it in the future. We've punted this for, 4 or 5 years, and I really wouldn't want to punt it again. And we can always change it going forward. And I agree with Director Yonan that there are exceptions and there's reasons, but for instance, land acquisition delay. I mean, that could be the problem on the service board side as opposed to, the other side. So I think we need to be pretty tight on that. So having said that, I think we need to spend a lot of time, and I, again, totally agree with Director Katarik that it is very important, that we get this right. It can be an iterative process. It's been an iterative process, but we should probably nail some things down in this next budget call. Thank you.
Tom.
Chairman, just wanted to follow up and say that I agree with Director Carey. I think we can walk and chew gum, put out funding in a stable way for folks to plan while we are actively thinking about what the future allocation looks like. Also, just wanted to underscore and put 2 things on the record is that this is one of the key new responsibilities that we have in the stronger RTA proposal. So really, this is the test. If we want to prove to Springfield that a regional body can do capital planning and programming better and more sophisticated, this is it. This is the challenge. And then to Director Yonan's point about transparency and oversight, which is another theme that Springfield is really looking at us to step up to. One is just a question as we talked about federal match. How are we matching those formula funds right now? The federal formula funds. Where are the funding coming? Because that's usually an 80% federal, 20% local match. Where's that coming from now?
The service boards right now use tollway credits, so there's no actual dollar match. It's a tollway credit.
That's an obscure, esoteric part of the federal highway program. The short story is we're not matching that with hard money. And so I think, just getting that on the record is an important element to say that we're getting 100% federal funding for our capital program. We're not maximizing that. That might be a policy aim that we want to leverage the funding that Director Yonan always talks about is leverage and federal funding. That's something that, I think we should look at our peers, how many of them are also doing that and what are the advantages and challenges of that. The last point that I'd ask you to consider as we think about diving into this more deeply is the cost of capital projects, which Director Colson has brought up plenty of time. It's more expensive to build transit in the United States relative to our peers. There's excellent research from NYU, Transportation Institute, and others about how to address that. And we have a project management oversight function. Is that helping? How does our distribution of funding accelerate the efficient, quick delivery of projects? I think having that carrot of $1 billion and how we fund it and incorporating those policy aims is something that I'd ask you to think about as we get back and regroup and think about this, doing it differently.
Thank you, Director. I would just say that one of the issues with having a state of good repair needs that's 3 to 4x the annual funding is that service boards are sort of piecing together. So using some of all of these buckets to piece for a project together, that has in some ways collided with increasing costs, but also significant delays in vehicle procurement right now. So all of these industry forces outside of our control are also having an impact. But I agree that the ability to leverage the $1 billion in the best way possible is something we can have a much bigger say in.
Any other thoughts or comments, Director Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm encouraged by by this discussion because I think it shows that maybe the board is ready to start working with the regional focus. I would take a little different approach to what Director Carey said in terms of us punting on this. I would say that we couldn't reach consensus. The staff brought us recommendations that for whatever reason, regionalization, localization, whatever term you want to use, we didn't move on those. So I hope that what I'm hearing here is an indication that we're ready to really put the region first and to all focus on that and vote accordingly. And if we are, then I'll be a happy camper.
Any other comments or questions here?
I just wanted to add,
Yeah,
I
please.
think we as staff really appreciate that feedback, and I feel like a slight change of tone and desire to advance some of this, because as both Directors Ross and Carey have said, we've been trying to push this forward for the better part of 5 years. And so that feedback from the board to give us that direction to, what I heard was not just do this, but be more aggressive and take that stronger stand is the exact, I mean, because those of you who've been around for a while have seen this. We've come forward with other things and there wasn't the support to do it. So that's the exact kind of feedback why we wanted to come to you with that information today. And I take to heart, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we may not get to perfect for this year's budget cycle, but we can also share like what we're thinking about in a broader, more regional approach, a stronger approach going forward, while incorporating something actually into this year's budget cycle to sort of get the momentum going, if nothing else, too. So thank you.
Anything else for this panel? Great, good discussion. Thank you all very much. All right, 6D, transit is the answer update. Tina and her panel, I see Rob.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Tina Fassett-Smith, Director of Communications. So there are only 2 items for our strategic plan update today, both focused on continuing and collective efforts to ensure the General Assembly passes a sustainable funding solution along with governance reform before the legislative session ends in 2 weeks. So I'll just be me and Rob this morning. As I mentioned when I introduced the Save Transit Now campaign last month, we can go to the next slide, please, sorry. Thanks. As I mentioned when I introduced the campaign last month, our goal and our responsibility has been to keep the public informed about the fiscal cliff, what our vision is for the future of the transit system, and what's at stake if the legislature fails to act. The Save Transit Now campaign continues the commitment to transparent engagement. We began with Transit as the Answer, and as such, we continue to prioritize providing a platform for the public to both learn about the challenges facing the system and to be part of advocating for a solution. Our goal for the campaign has been to raise awareness and motivate people to contact their legislators about the positive impact transit has on their lives and communities and why it needs to be sustainably funded. So far, we've seen success on that front, as well as faced some criticism for the effort. You can go to the next slide, please. Over the life of the 7-week campaign, we expect about 3.3 million people to view or hear an ad. At this halfway point, we've seen a significant amount of engagement, with more than 25,000 visits to savetransitnow.org and over 9,000 letters sent to legislators across every legislative district in the RTA region. Last week, we launched a separate campaign to bring attention to the potential loss of 66% of the coverage area for paratransit service on weekends should funding not materialize. The URL to take action for that is rtachicago.org/saveada. We know that despite some public criticism it has received, the campaign has been effective based on conversations with senior leaders in the General Assembly. We're continuing advocacy efforts in conjunction with the campaign through the end of the session, which includes outreach to both stakeholders and the media. Barring any questions, I'll turn things over to Rob.
Any questions? Director Gorman, you want to wait or, okay. All right, Rob?
Good morning. Rob Nash, Director of Government Affairs, and I'll update, yes, thank you. I'll update on proposed reforms and funding discussions in Springfield and our advocacy efforts in support of those. Next slide, please. As we've shared with the board and appointing authorities, lawmakers, stakeholders, advocates, other interest groups, the RTA developed legislative language around key oversight and accountability reforms that we think will strengthen the RTA as a regional entity overseeing transit. Last week, we posted publicly that language that defines additional strong oversight authority and how and in what areas that new authority would be applied. We also stress the importance of funding and reform. We have consistently deferred to appointing authorities and the legislative leaders on proposed structural changes to board appointments and board composition, but these changes alone will not enhance operations of the system unless they are paired with sufficient funding to close the fiscal cliff and boost transit operations with additional frequency, coverage, and innovation. Riders and taxpayers will define success based on their interactions with the systems, and while the governance is an important policy issue, no doubt, it is funding that will make the difference in riders' daily lives. To that end, we have proposed a funding approach that would address the fiscal cliff first and then distribute additional funding based on regional service standards that would be developed by the RTA in partnership with the service boards. Next slide. Or excuse me, hold on one sec. Some additional aspects of the proposal. As kind of referenced earlier in the conversation, capital project selection based on performance metrics as required by Public Act 102-573, which the RTA would also, we propose, participate in transit capital alternative analysis studies. We have put forth a reduction of the state mandated recovery ratio from 50% to 20%, knowing that we might have to revisit depending on new revenues as the session concludes. We have put forth a mandate to develop a regional bus rapid transit plan. We have suggested the continuation of service board performance metrics as required by the 2023 Transit Omnibus Bill on a permanent status. And then we have put forth a suggestion of a study on housing and real estate development opportunities near transit stops and stations. We've talked about these elements before, but happy to answer questions as we conclude the report here. Next slide. While we continue to conduct analysis on various funding proposals as requested by lawmakers, we have remained agnostic on the specific funding sources that could be used to close the fiscal cliff and enhance services. Beyond working to ensure funding will be sufficient to close the budget gap and grow over time to support enhanced services, we acknowledge the General Assembly is managing the process to vet potential revenue alternatives. However, we did address some funding issues in our proposal, including advocating for full funding of the current free and reduced fare programs and ADA paratransit, set at a total of $400 million. Additional state support for transit funding through the Public Transportation Fund, increasing the match that the state puts forward on our sales tax collections, and then an elimination of the state surcharge on sales tax collections, estimated to be about $20 million annually for the system. We continue to stress that funding by the end of session is essential to avoid harming riders, and the planning process for cuts that will have to follow immediately following adjournment if funding is not identified. Next slide, please. Again, this is a timeline that you've seen before, but if legislators do not identify a funding solution by the end of session in May, staff across the system will need to immediately start planning for cuts. All plans for service innovation and expansion, such as CTA's frequent bus network, Metro's transition to regional rail, and PACE's revision expansion, will be paused. In June, RTA will inform service boards of available public funding for 2026 that could include no additional revenue from Springfield. Service boards will develop budgets with service cuts and fare increases in accordance with federal Title VI analysis requirements, including a public engagement process and hearings that would be conducted across the region. In November and December, we would go through our annual budget process to finalize the plans, and service cuts would begin in early 2026. So this timeline, again, dictates our request and priority for addressing funding issues in the current legislative session in Springfield. Next slide. Last week was the deadline for bills to advance past their committees or to receive an extension, and some additional deadlines are approaching. A few proposals that we've been watching have advanced past this stage, including a proposal to expand the transit benefit program to part-time workers and various other proposals. But obviously, the focus is on the overall funding and reform issues. Both the Senate and House have held multiple committee hearings and other working group meetings over the last 2 years. And we do believe draft bill language, particularly on the potential reforms, is likely to be released imminently. As I mentioned, whether the proposals also include a comprehensive funding mechanism remains to be seen. We have briefed policy and budget staff, lawmakers, and others on the current structure of collecting and distributing revenue and other aspects of the system, and will continue those discussions regularly until the end of session. Chairman Dillard, Leanne, and I have also outlined our approach on reforms with lawmakers, stakeholders, advocates, multiple interest groups, and we expect those conversations to continue as all interested parties begin to offer proposed amendments to a final proposal. I think there has been some important progress, and we do expect this process to continue right up until the end of session, which is scheduled for May 31st. With that, I'll conclude my report and happy to take any questions.
Yes, Director Mondero.
Mr. Nash, can you clarify? So you previously provided the board in April, or RTA staff provided the board draft legislation in April. So how many substantive changes are there now, or if any, from that April legislation?
Yeah, and just to clarify too, that the process, or excuse me, the policy is posted on our website currently, and we have distributed it to a wide list of folks that subscribe to both the RTA newsletter and then a set of stakeholders, including the appointing authorities. The fundamental buckets of reform, which are the strong oversight authority, the service standards, capital project prioritization, and fair policy and rider communications, rider technology, those remain unchanged from earlier versions. We have made changes on the technical side. As I mentioned, we originally had suggested elimination of the recovery ratio. We brought that back to the 20% level. And then there was some additional language added that mirrored language that organized labor had put forth on the Transit Ambassador Program. But the substantive changes in terms of new responsibilities for the RTA have remained unchanged.
Did you speak with the service boards before publishing that language?
We've spoken with service boards throughout the process, and yes, I mean,
Okay, so they're aware of things like the Transit Ambassador.
I spoke with the service, we speak with the service boards on the government affairs side on a rolling basis, but we have a weekly meeting, and yes, we discussed it.
And just to clarify too, we have shared draft versions, even outlines before we even had draft legislative language with the EDs on our regular monthly meeting, and then in other check-ins and other communications that we've had.
Okay, it's just a small point maybe to you, but to me, we are the governing board of the RTA. And as far as I know, I only saw it in the email this morning that it was posted to the public, right? So if there's legislation that impacts the RTA, that's coming from the RTA, I think we as a board should have a meaningful opportunity to review that before it goes out. So
just to clarify, our language has been distributed to, as I mentioned, the wide variety of stakeholders. We have not filed legislation in Springfield. We have offered our vision on what we think reforms should reflect. And so while that seems like a small difference, it has been requested of us to put forth those reform ideas. Chairman Dillard, started that process in January with the presentation of Transforming Transit, and we consistently made those same proposals at the 8 Senate hearings and then in formal presentations to the House Working Group, but no legislation has been filed on behalf of the RTA.
okay, but I think it's fair to say that every time you do that, everyone assumes that the RTA board is fully endorsing that. And I want to make sure that as a city-appointed board member, that the interests of the city of Chicago and its citizens are being considered correctly. So just please note that.
Director Kotarek.
I'll echo Director Mondero's comments. I was just reading the language. There's some pretty substantive stuff in here. I think the recovery ratio one is certainly a big deal. In the earlier proposals by others, advocates and labor, cleaning up the recovery ratio and making it a really transparent, accountable measure, I think is a policy goal that we all, agree on, and getting there. I don't know if this does it, because right now we back out a lot of things for expenses in the recovery ratio. So security spending, for example, does not count for our recovery ratio. That is a absolutely essential operating cost. It's one that I think there's a lot of interest in spending more and targeting it strategically. And so, that kind of isn't in there, isn't addressed. The transit ambassador program in here, just was reading, and this was, I think, Director Mondero may have been talking about. This is a totally new position, and so one that I think we all feel may have some great utility in addressing the rider quality and comfort of the ride, and security and safety, which is totally paramount to this reform. But there's a legislative requirement that this be a full-time position, and just curious if that was something that the service board supported, or where that, that requirement came about, given that we don't know what this position might be and what it might do. Maximum flexibility seems to be the way that you might want to approach that. This is a pretty stringent legislative requirement for something that it would be brand new.
Again, I think we had original language in our proposal from April that contained transit ambassador language. We did adopt language that the Labor Coalition had put forward simply because it was, we thought, well-crafted. But the service boards, again, have had versions of this shared with them from the beginning. We have never positioned this as a unified and endorsed proposal. This is what the RTA put forth as a vision on how to reform the system. So the standard of sign off from each of the service boards was not part of the process, but that it doesn't mean they haven't been consulted on the structure of the proposal.
And I'll guarantee you that the recovery ratio, that's really in the hands of the General Assembly. We need to be there to give them the technical support. And like you said, a lot of things are backed out of that recovery ratio. We need to make sure that the key legislators understand that, and I think they do, but we need to reiterate that. And the ambassadors program, is again, one that the legislature is going to focus on, and that one's being pushed heavily by organized labor. Director Gorman.
Thank you, Chairman Dillard. Just in regards to the campaign, I know you mentioned that it's obviously successful because you are, reaching some criticism for some of the efforts, so I congratulate you on that. But some inaccurate comments, and maybe you can give you an opportunity to clear it up, Tina. Tina, how much is the campaign efforts? And obviously, we're going to carry through on the campaign until, we get hopefully some success at the end of the session. But forward, because I've seen comments where it's said, oh, we need, funding for transit. We don't need a $750 million campaign. Obviously, so
Thanks, Leanne. When I was asked, so we won't know the cost of the campaign until it's over, right? That's how media pricing works, but it cannot exceed $750,000. I expect it to come in somewhere between 550 and 650, but I gave that 750 number because I didn't want it. That's as much as it could possibly be.
right. Yeah, so it's far from 750 million.
Yeah, that's not even close.
Thank you for the clarification.
Can I just offer one note? Chairman Dillard, at your presentation at the Chicago Chamber, and I think Director Katark, you were there as well. I thought former CTA Board Chair Carol Brown offered an interesting anecdote about how we conducted. I was fortunate enough to serve as a supporting role, outside support role in the 2006-7-8 campaign on funding and reform, and a similar campaign was conducted during that discussion. I remember at least 2 of the 4 legislative leaders calling up and saying, please stop these emails and these calls. And in fact, Carol Brown related that the Senate President didn't speak with her for 2 years following the campaign. But she also reiterated that it was the right thing to do because it was key to activating. One element that I do not want to get lost in this campaign, a key reason for doing the campaign based on research that we had done with actual residents of the region, including sort of a set of focus groups for different parts of the region, there was a concerning lack of awareness of the fiscal cliff fundamentally, particularly as you moved out from the urban core. And a lot of the purpose of the campaign is to raise awareness of what is actually pending. As a unit of government, we felt it was important to educate our constituents. And I know that we are not on the same footing as elected officials in terms of state lawmakers, but we do have that responsibility to make sure everyone knows what's at stake. So that's a key part of it to remember, and the urgency to act. I think one of the greatest testaments to the need for the campaign is the fact that some folks are still thinking we can wait till after May 31st to address some of these things. The fact that that's still seen as a viable option is concerning, and it should be concerning because while things can happen quickly, we have a process that we have to conduct to start talking about cuts. And while talking about cuts isn't as bad as cuts, it still causes damage to a lot of folks. They have to start thinking about planning for alternatives. Employees have to start thinking about impacts for them. So we do think it's important to keep the campaign active because people need to understand what's at stake.
And I guess I'd point out, we have advertised all the time. This is not anything new to have a media campaign. WBBM News Radio 78's traffic reports we've sponsored for years. Metro, The Way to Really Fly, had those advertisements out for a long time. Just anecdotally, I happened to sit next to one of my law partners on the train in the way this morning. I told him I'm going to the RTA meeting, and an announcement came over the PA system from our conductor that this train is absolutely full. Everybody needs to clear off all the seats. Yes, we have lots of people standing in the aisles and sitting on the stairwell, but you got to make room for me and my colleagues to get through with respect to fare collection and safety. And my law partner said, wow, why don't you just add, cars to this train? I said, well, number one, we don't have any extra cars. And number two, think about what this will be like if we have to reduce the service by 40%, because we can't even get all the people on this train today with the current funding. And this is an educated man who clearly didn't understand the fiscal cliff, who rides the system every day. But we've always advertised, it's always been part of it. I did an interview. I see my friend Craig Wall out here from Channel 7, but one of his counterparts the other day said, have the ads been effective? I went through Tina's statistics, and I said, and it's our job, a duty to the writers and to the public to educate folks that we do have this fiscal cliff. And if you want more frequent service, safer service, better service, we've historically been underfunded, and we can give that to you, including cutting back waiting times by 50%. And then I smiled at the reporter and said, just the fact that you're asking me these questions and you're going to put it on the news today is an extension of our media campaign by free media. Waking up the public, and mostly important, our writers, that we have, a doomsday scenario. And even if you do not take mass transit, we have the second worst congested city in America. Actually, it's worldwide for congestion. Can you imagine if we have to put another 20 to 30% of our riders out on the roads? Metro alone, this is not the CTA, Metro alone, if somehow Metro were to, not be there, would require an extra 26 miles or lanes of highway. We don't have that space. We don't have that money. So if you don't take mass transit, you're still greatly impacted, including insurance rates, which any of the major insurers will tell you that without a mass transit system that moves 1.2 million people a day, it's hard to fathom, but insurance rates for auto owners would be even higher. But it takes hours. I laughed yesterday. My 22-minute ride out to my station was probably an hour and 15 minutes by automobile. I don't know how people do that every day. I make useful time on my Metro commute, but we would have absolute gridlock if we don't have a way to get 1.2 million riders a day to and from school, their healthcare appointments, and work. And it's a crisis. We're not alone. Every other major city in the country is facing this. You've done a better job of making sure that our funds last until January of 2026. Some cities are already out of those funds or about ready to run out. We have managed ours in a way to let the legislature have thoughtful time with the governor's office on how they're going to close this fiscal cliff for us, but most importantly, provide more frequent, safer, better, and cleaner service if we were able to get the additional funding over and above the fiscal cliff. So we've always advertised, campaign is working, and we'll see where we go, Rob Nash. No pressure, buddy. But thank you. All right, let's move on to the resolutions certifying the financial results for the first quarter of 2025. Malik and Sarah Rubino will be our presenters. How are we doing or looking?
Chairman, members of the board, I'm here again to briefly go over the performance measures update, especially related to the omnibus bill that you certify annually before finance walks you through the action item that you'll be voting on. Next slide, please. First, our quarterly finance and performance report has been released for Q1 of 2025. As you see in one of the charts on the right, we are comparing the first quarter of 24 with 25 for the number of vehicle miles delivered. The percent change shows that especially CTA on urban bus and heavy rail compared to 2024 with all the additional hiring added significant more service compared to 2024. Metro was essentially flat. Suburban bus pace saw a little bit of an increase, and ADA actually saw a decline, the traditional ADA service in the miles, because the subsidy services like TAP and RAP are not reported to NTD. So this shows that over the year, CT has significantly added service to the network. Next slide, please. Quick update on work relating to the omnibus legislation passed in late 2023, which requires publication of various kinds of data related to staffing, service and safety and security measures on each service board's website. We are charged with the oversight of this project, and we have been coordinating working group meetings with service boards throughout 2024 and early 2025. In December, you certified compliance with State Act 103-0281 in order for each service board to receive their reduced and free fare reimbursement funds from the state. At that time, you had asked us for some improvements in 2025, so I'm here to report on what those changes are, especially related to safety and security measures. Next slide, please. So this just provides an overview of the different data elements reported by CTA, Metro, and PACE on the safety and security data. I'd also like to mention that CTA is now showing data all the way through April 2025. Metro and PACE are showing data mostly through March 2025. We have seen CTA reporting data on security complaints and federally reportable safety and security incidents. Metro is reporting similar data, but also grade crossing enforcement details, police officer train rides, and station checks. And PACE has reported crime incidents, percentage of buses with alarms and cameras and expenditures on private security. One of the items you had asked is that we report on the effectiveness of safety and security measures, which has been a difficult task, but we have used our survey data to compare to previous years, and we'll show you what the results are showing in that area. Next slide, please. So this is the Q1 panel survey that RTA completed, which we presented to you at the April board meeting. This shows that on the left, that the personal security is the third most important quality or area of concern for our riders, behind service availability when and where it is needed and on-time performance. On the right, it shows that 70% of respondents told us that they have not noticed significant changes in their perception of personal security over the prior 3 months. Our next Q2 survey is already out on the street, so we'll come back to you to show if this has changed, especially as you might have noticed in the last couple of months, CT has really ramped up public discussion of a lot of the security work that they are doing. So we are really keen to see if these numbers change in how many people know about these measures and what they are seeing as the change. Next slide, please. Specifically, in an effort to understand riders' concern about personal security, CTA also conducts rider satisfaction surveys, which feature security questions. CTA's latest survey was in fall of 2024. They are doing about 2 surveys a year, and we are coordinating to make sure our surveys sort of align with their surveys. They asked riders about personal security on way to and from a stop or a train station, at the stop or the train station, and on board a vehicle. So they're really getting into the details. So here you see the results from 2024 compared to, there's a variable of change to Q3 of 2022. So over 2 years, what are we seeing? The 3 measures of personal security have the lowest satisfaction score. They're at the bottom of this list of measures. However, the scores have improved for all 3 measures since 2022. Most notably at the train station, there's a 12% gain in satisfaction. So we're moving in the right direction, but there's still significant work to do in terms of the effectiveness. Next slide, please. The other area that you had sort of requested us take a deeper look is the expenses. As you know, Metra is reporting them on the dashboard. So we worked with CT, Metra, and PACE, especially as we just had a discussion on the exemptions of the recovery ratio. That was our method to get into some of the details of the expenses. This is showing the average monthly expenditures on security for CT, Metra, and PACE. CT at 7.6 million, Metra at 3.7, and PACE around 30,000. Annually in 2024, 136 million were spent on security-related expenses. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I'll just mention some of the measures that are being reported by Metra and PACE. As you see, for these 3 months in 2025, there are 4 measures being reported. We are having some discussions with Metra on any additional measures that they can add to this, but the data is current and there is significant police officer train rides and station checks happening on the Metra system. Next slide, please. And as you know, PACE has been reporting the number of crime incidents, code of conduct violations, percentage of buses with onboard cameras, total expenditure on private security. They have the data shown here through February 2025 on these specific measures, and we're continuing to work with them too to make sure the data is updated in a timely manner. Next slide, please. And finally, the publication of this data allows us to keep an eye on the amount of service being delivered on the street by each service board. So that's really the objective, not just reporting the data, but what it's telling us. So this chart is showing service delivery, which is displayed as a percentage of scheduled service that was delivered. On each service board website, you can get deeper details on route and state and line level information. CTA bus, Metra, and PACE bus have been pretty consistent over the last 6 months, delivering between 90 and 100% of their schedule. As you see, CTA Rail started seeing a decline over winter. Some of that is seasonal with retirements around December and sort of training classes that really pick up in spring, summer, and fall. But also that CTA added significant scheduled service during this time to get their schedules up. So on the ground, they're delivering more service, but the percentage to schedule has slipped into the 80% range again. So we'll continue to monitor that on a monthly basis, and I'll be back here for another update at the next quarter. So before I turn it over to finance, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions or comments? Director Mondero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Malik. This is good stuff. I have a couple questions. The first, you mentioned that the CTA, you're working with the CTA on implementing a survey. How is the survey sent out to riders, and are you implementing Ventra? I'll make the same comment I did last month about, if we can get it into the Ventra app so that most of the daily Ventra users can get that to pop up affirmatively, I think you'd get a lot of.
Yeah, that's a great point. There are some privacy policy concerns with Ventra. So the way we do is that riders do not want to see or be spammed with, private sector style marketing materials. So what we do is CTA reaches out to its Ventra email list and asks if they would like to receive RTA or CTA surveys. We do this as part of our 3-year satisfaction survey, so you'll hear more about it in a couple of months because it's finishing up. But that has really opened up our ability to send emails, but also make it representative. So we are hearing enough from all 6 counties. We are hearing from the south side, from the suburbs. So it's really been helpful in balancing. It's all coming through the Ventra system. So we have about 10,000 emails as part of this quarterly, and about 1,500 people took the survey. And then CTA is sending out a survey every 6 months, so we make sure our schedules align, and they're also using the Ventra email list to contact riders.
Okay, great, thank you. My second question, I found it interesting, looking at the, is it Metra data on police officer train rides? Is it Metra? Page 53. January, it's 314 police officer train rides, and then it goes to 121 to 63. And I thought that number might be a bit more consistent. And so I'm wondering, why is there such a wide variance? And is that typical, like if we were to extrapolate out for the past year, would I be seeing things like that? And I thought that it'd be like the converse, that, oh, it's cold, everyone, no one's going out. And as it got warmer, we'd see more rides. But seriously, I would love to see that number higher, or at least consistent, and that we could kind of then track, what's crime rates compared to the presence of security on the system.
Yeah, thank you. We will definitely convey that to Metra and get you more detail on anything specific that may have happened in March with the lower number, or if they're waiting on additional data. One of the things we are making sure is that there isn't too long of a wait between end of a month and reporting the data. So sometimes it might come in pieces. Especially at Metra, this is a new measure, not so new, but it's only been a year that there may be a lot of checks, but they may not be counted. So now the officers have to actually make sure they're letting the data folks know that they did that piece of work. So we'll get you the information of what the change has been between Jan and March, but also additional data might come in to solve that issue too.
And do we have any kind of baseline for CTA at this point?
So CTA is fully reliant on CPD. If you back in 22 and 23, we were able to get, when I was at CTA, quarterly results out of CPD. So I know as part of their board meeting, they did relate some numbers to their board just yesterday about the station checks. Unfortunately, our requirement is that this data be available monthly. So CTA has been sort of quarterly updating their board, and we'll make sure you see those numbers, but they have not been yet able to access this information from CPD on a monthly basis, which is the requirement of the omnibus.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd really like to see those numbers that were given to the CTA board yesterday. as Rob Nash will attest, there was a bus operator testifying in Springfield within the last week to 10 days about the number of CPD officers they believe are assigned to the CTA, extrapolating on the back of a napkin for what New York has, knowing they're 3 times larger than we are. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but New York has essentially 20 times more police officers assigned to their system per rider than Chicago. 20 times. Marijuana. A couple of, I wouldn't say it's more than a couple. Lots of folks grab me and I'm like Nora, I'm out there riding all the time. And they go, how do you differentiate and complaints about smoking between cigarettes and marijuana? And these folks obviously have some very strong opinions as to what the legalization of marijuana has done and what it's done to the CTA system primarily. Any way to track regular smoking from marijuana smoking?
I'll reach out. It's one of the more recent ways CT has been tackling is trying to get sort of CPD or private security out as quickly as possible as incidents come in, especially say through the chatbot. But unless they come in a written form, it's really been categorized into smoking and substance use. So it is just sort of one package, but we will reach back out and see if there's a way to split it up. Regardless, I agree with you. It's whether it's smoking or other usage, it has one of the biggest impacts, as we saw in the survey last month, for riders to feel that this is not the kind of environment they want to be in. And that should be one of the top priorities to address from our side.
I had breakfast with one of the city's major civic leaders recently, and she told me she will not ride because she does not want her clothes smelling like marijuana when she gets off of the Brown line to go to work. So, you know, any differentiation we can try to see from marijuana and regular, regular smoking would be, I'm hearing it from a lot of folks who are, out there taking the system that marijuana is a problem, little different than just regular smoking. Let's put it that way. Tom, you want to chime in? And thank you to your day job employers who have been pretty vocal lately, as have the bus operators and L operators, about safety.
Absolutely. I think it's the number one issue that, everyone is focused on. And I want to give credit to you for listening to the board in December when we approved the first time going through this. It's a reminder that millions are at stake for us to get this exercise right. It's just not sort of a heady thing. If we don't do it right, there's I think $14 or $20 million in state subsidy that we would lose. And so there's been good progress here. I think, really narrowing in on that effectiveness, it's a difficult question to answer, but it's not one that we should stop asking. I think in the same way that the capital programming is an exercise in all of the things that are, Springfield related about reform, this is another one about what our role is in safety and security. And I think us really digging deep into the effectiveness of the investments, we have to be able to evaluate whether or not millions in, contracted security is working, the cameras and technology that we have. We don't still have a clear idea what that is. And I think that this is also sort of the baby steps towards, an ambassador program that we just talked about. How are we going to evaluate that if we don't have the tools to evaluate what we've done? So maybe there's some utility in looking backwards in what the CTA's experience was like in the past. Can we ask it that way? The last point I'll bring up is the hearing that the chairman brought up. I watched that and that really affected me. I heard Keith Hill and his members really speak to the serious safety issues that they experience every day. And it was almost a cry for help. You know, it's sort of like, who's out there? Who cares? I think, you know, we have agency in that, and getting our arms around that, I think we should really think about, in addition to the rider perception of safety, which in one of these was, you know, 49%, only 49% sort of feel safe. You know, what do we know about the worker experience too? I think that sort of survey and that understanding, where are those issues most prevalent on the bus, on the train, that's I think a key data point that we should incorporate here too, so that we can effectively put investment in places where it's going to impact and improve safety the most.
Thank you. Yeah. Dennis.
Just to state again, and Mr. Director Katarik said it very eloquently, it'd be great to see all this data. And I know, Malik, you're doing a fantastic job of getting it. And I know it's like pulling teeth sometimes from the service board, but as we get it, like what's for security, I agree. I think it's the #1 issue for the service boards and particularly for CTA, but like, what are we doing? Like police presence, security guards, you know, non-law enforcement, security camera, like what is the effort on our part? And then how responsive is it in terms of dealing with lowering crime, right? And I think we're still far away from seeing what the resources going in means for output. And that's what we want to like eventually see, so that way we can help the service boards and address like, hey, Metro's doing this fantastic, and maybe CTA can emulate them or vice versa, right? So right now, I think it's like we're just seeing snippets and there's like no action, like clear action item on it other than spend more money, right? But the public wants us to like be efficient, and that's why we need to see that's longer, more comprehensive narrative from all this data.
Thank you.
Just a comment for all of you Chicago representatives. You have better access to the CTA and perhaps the mayor's office than some of us do. And, you know, I know you guys aren't shy because I hear it from all of you. But I would be clearly doing your thing to your appointed or appointing authority on safety or any other issue that you feel strongly about. Nora?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also just want to acknowledge too, when we talk about safety, also safety of the workers as well. You know, it's like they go to work every day and face a lot of really tough issues. I've had a lot of conversations with Keith Hill, who is the president of 241. And, you know, it really is, it's ridiculous what these workers have to put up with every day. And so maybe, you know, being able to kind of get their perspective as well, do a survey with them, kind of talk about what works, what doesn't, something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I mean,
Thank you.
we need to listen to these operators. I mean, one of them, Director Ryan, said, look, I'm a bus operator, but I also have to be a mental health advocate. When somebody walks on, you know, it takes a few years of experience, but I got to know, do I do anything? Don't I do anything? What's going to set this person who clearly needs some assistance off? And, you know, so aside from driving or operating the bus itself, you know, these folks are jack of all trades with respect to trying to figure out, you know, what's the condition of the folks who are their riders and the person who may have just got on that clearly has an issue or two. Any other comments from Malik before we go on to Sarah on actual financial reports or results? Sarah, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Sarah Rubino, Principal Analyst, and today I'll be asking the board to certify the Service Board's financial results through the first quarter of 2025 against the adopted operating budgets. Let's look at our primary metric for evaluating substantial accordance with budget, the operating deficit performance. Next slide, please. CTA, Metra, and Pace Suburban Service each reported favorable to budget operating deficits due to lower than budgeted operating expense performance. Of particular note is that Pace's favorability has finished the first quarter down from the 20% plus range where it spent most of last year, which is good to see. ADA paratransit ridership was about 300,000 rides above budget through March, in turn increasing purchase transportation expense and producing a result which was more than $4 million unfavorable. This suggests that another funding shortfall for ADA paratransit is developing in 2025. The system-wide operating deficit of the service boards, including PACE ADA Paratransit, was $734.1 million. This result was $47.7 million, or 6.1% favorable to budget. Accordingly, staff recommends a finding of insubstantial accordance with budget through the first quarter of 2025 for the results of CTA, Metra, PACE Suburban Service, and the region as a whole, and recommends that ADA Paratransit be found not in substantial accordance with budget due to a 6.3% unfavorable operating deficit. The appropriate remedial action required for this level of first quarter underperformance is an action plan, although a budget amendment will likely be required later this year to address the budget shortfall. The action plan will be jointly developed by PACE and the RTA and will be discussed in more detail in the next agenda item. Back in March, we provided a headcount update as the service boards dealt with the labor disruption brought on by COVID. On the next slide, we'll show how that has continued to improve thanks to the service board's recruiting and retention efforts. Next slide, please. Keeping in mind that each of the service boards budget a bit differently, on this slide we're showing the actual March employee headcounts at the service boards relative to budget, a combined total of a little over 17,000 full-time equivalents. Shortfalls range from about 3.5% at CTA to about 12% at PACE. These are significantly improved from just a couple months ago when CTA was at less than 10,000 FTEs and PACE was around 1,550. In general, all three service boards have made great strides in getting more fully staffed. Variances in employee headcount should generally track with the budget variances shown on the previous slide. We will continue to update the board quarterly on the employment at the service boards. That concludes my presentation. Back to you, Mr. Chairman, for a vote on the first quarter certifications.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions of Sarah? Yeah, Tom.
Just one quick
Go, Chair.
request. As you presented some of these numbers to us monthly, we used to have that little ticker on the sort of federal funding and where we're at, a little dial. I just thought that was useful, and the more, I think, transparency we can have into that, X date coming is good for us as we communicate the doomsday, the fiscal cliff, and just encourage us to put that back.
Understood. And we took that down because at the end of 2024, all the service boards drew it 100% down, but they still have some in reserve, so we can show the utilization instead of the drawdown.
Good. So would I be wrong if I draw a conclusion that, and there's been some discussion of CTA overtime, but if you're down 3.5% in your head count, and you can't fill all the positions, although I get it that they're basically almost there. But one of the reasons for the need for overtime of the CTA is they're obviously down head count. And if you want fewer ghost buses and more frequent service, somebody is going to have to operate those things. But, am I okay drawing a conclusion that some of the pressure to have overtime at the CTA is because they're having trouble filling positions?
I can jump in. I think you're right that as you saw with the rail service delivery starting to fall under 90%, which means there are unfilled scheduled runs where there isn't staff available to operate that red line train. But the other option, union negotiated, is if someone's eligible for overtime and they would like to take it, they could do that. So a mix of just having to cancel a trip or fill it with overtime is how has to be managed. However, the numbers are ticking up, as Sarah said, compared to our last update. More than 500 positions have been filled. So there's less and less need for both situations of ghost buses and overtime as these positions are getting filled. I'll also make a plug for their dashboard that includes absenteeism rates, which post-pandemic, as we all know, continue to just have a new baseline that's higher than before. So not only do service boards have to hire up to the actual need, but on probably 10+% on top of that. So there's enough extra board at each terminal who could jump in and don't need that overtime or a ghost train or a bus situation.
You know, and I applaud Representative Marty Moylan, who is at least focused on overtime. And, you know, Rob Nash and I talked to Marty a couple of times, Representative Moylan a couple of times yesterday. So, you know, it's something the legislature is focused on. But, you know, I know that the CTA is within their pure margins of what percentage of overtime they have, but clearly, you know, the need for greater employees, and it takes time to train these folks, especially elevated or L-train operators. You know, we need to watch, but overtime is something we need to keep a good, close eye on, just to make sure that it's not out of step with where we ought to be. Okay, so how about a motion to, on Sarah's presentation, a motion in a second. Director Groveman, you have a question? Yeah, please.
So just for clarity, what we're gonna say is this is we're gonna approve the regional view, but there's a contingency that there's an action plan coming from ADA.
Correct. ADA will be found not in substantial accordance, prompting an action plan.
Okay.
That'll be presented next month.
And then, okay, so based on the expectation of the action plan, then we are gonna approve the region as a whole.
Yes, correct.
And hopefully the state will do better on its 4% funding of the mandated ADA paratransit that we have today, because that's hundreds of millions of dollars the state's not providing for mandated transit services for people with disabilities. Is there a motion? Director Groveman moves, seconded by Director Gorman, that we accept this resolution, and we'll get an action plan, Sarah, and we'll see it. Any discussion? If not, Madam Secretary, take a roll call on this, please.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Gadding?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Aye. Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Tarek?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Pang? He's there. I'll come back. Director Tondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Sagar? Director Yonan?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
And then Director Pang.
And yes.
Thank you.
Thank
14
you.
ayes.
So 7A, the resolution certifying the financial results first quarter are approved. Thank you very much, too. 7B is the ADA paratransit, speaking of paratransit, 2024 funding amendment. Doug Anderson and Michael Vandercreek. And anybody else that super, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Doug Anderson, Manager of Budgets and Analysis. Michael Vandercreek and Peter Kirsten are here with me to help field questions on this action item, which follows up our informational presentation last month. The recommendations in this proposed ordinance are being made after extensive discussions with PACE staff and as a result of the first quarter certification vote that just occurred. Next slide, please. First, to recap where we are with the 2024 and 2025 ADA paratransit results. As we showed last month, 2024 ridership exceeded budget by about 16%, a forecast miss which led to a significant increase in expense and in the 2024 funding need. And because the 2025 budget was developed before the 2024 ridership increase had fully emerged, the 2025 ADA paratransit budget was in hindsight set too low. As Sarah showed earlier, we already have a 2025 shortfall developing after the first quarter. Our recommendation will be to fund the $25.5 million shortfall from the RTA's ADA paratransit reserve while also requiring PACE and the RTA to jointly develop a detailed action plan to recommend potential changes. Next slide, please. Here's another look at the ridership results for 2024. PACE had budgeted for an overall 5% growth in ridership from 2023, accompanied by a shift away from traditional ADA paratransit rides to the newly launched Rideshare Access Program. This assumption was consistent with the conclusions and intent of the RTA's 2022 ADA Paratransit Innovation Study. However, while TAP and RAP rides finished the year close to budget at 1.7 million, traditional ADA rides continued to grow to 3.2 million in 2024, far exceeding budget projections. Next slide, please. That increased ridership in 2024 led to the unfavorable expense performance of $28.6 million shown here, offset by $3 million of favorable revenue, primarily from increased fare collections. These variances combined to increase the funding requirement for 2024 by $25.5 million, or around 11%. PACE subsequently requested use of the ADA Paratransit Reserve to meet the increased funding need. The ADA Paratransit Reserve holds prior year funding surpluses and serves as a buffer against the financial impact of a simple ridership miss. However, this was not a simple ridership miss, but rather a complex situation involving a newly launched service and how that might impact or not impact demand for traditional ADA service. Therefore, the staff recommendation is to fund the 2024 funding shortfall from the reserve while also requiring a data-based action plan to prevent a similar recurrence in 2025 and future years. The plan will consider whether adjustments to both the RTA certification process and the TAP and RAP program parameters may be necessary. Next slide, please. The action plan to be developed is expected to reflect the items shown on this slide. PACE has provided detailed 2024 operational data for all three modes of ADA paratransit service: traditional ADA, TAP, and RAP. Analysis of that data is ongoing and will inform the types of adjustments which may be needed. A review of peer region programs and experiences will be a source to determine best practices. All data collected will be used to determine what, if any, adjustments may be needed to the ADA paratransit certification process and to PACE's existing operational guardrails for riders of each of the ADA paratransit options. RTA and PACE staff will work closely together to develop a detailed sequence of actions, which may also include other recommendations not shown here. Next slide. In closing, the proposed ordinance approves the use of $25.5 million from the ADA Paratransit Reserve to remedy the 2024 shortfall and requires a detailed action plan consistent with the first quarter results certification voted on earlier. After the distribution, $8 million would remain in the ADA Paratransit Reserve for future use and may become a component of the 2025 ADA budget amendment, which we anticipate will be needed after the second quarter results are received in August. And we will share the plan of recommended actions at next month's board meeting. Back to you, Mr. Chairman, for any questions the board may have.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Director Colson.
Obviously, this is not a sustainable situation. The ADA is a statutory right and it's an important service, but that statutory right does not contemplate that a bottomless pit of money be always available. I think we all know that. The statute favors the term reasonable. Reasonable is the term, that, loophole that a lawyer can drive a truck through. As we approach these deficits, I think cuts in ADA paratransit are possible, along with fare increases, and may become necessary. And are you going to look at everything on the table for that? Because something has to change here.
Yeah, I think on the previous slide, the potential action included examination of the parameters of the programs. That would include fare levels to be looked at.
Director Gorman.
Is there anybody that can just kind of go over the paratransit program? I was actually at an event where a woman was in a wheelchair and she had to, actually they dropped her off and then she had to wait like the hour for the vehicle to come and what she had to pay, or does anybody that can explain that, the program? I mean, it's a valuable program and much needed.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I'm glad you're expressing the interest in that. So there's three different types of service for operations of ADA paratransit. There's the traditional ADA paratransit where a customer would have to call the day in advance to book their ride. And those are all contracted carriers that PACE uses to provide those rides. So you call the day before, they schedule a time with you to pick you up, and they also schedule the time at that same time for the return trip back home. So those are prearranged trips that then the customer, takes. Then what PACE has done is put together two different subsidy programs with the intention of trying to save money for the region. One is the Taxi Access Program, and that's only in the city of Chicago. And when someone registers for that program, they get up to a $30 cab ride, and that PACE has to then subsidize. So PACE subsidizes up to $30, and the customer pays $3 for that ride. That saves a ton of money because right now it's projected that a traditional ADA paratransit ride is closer to $70.
Right.
So that's why they do that. There's the Rideshare Access Program, which is the third option. The Rideshare Access Program is new and it's available to residents of the city as well as the suburbs. And it's integrated with either Uber or a company called Userve, which is another TNC. And the customer can enroll in that program, and also it's a subsidy so that they can pay $2 for up to a $30 ride. Anything above that $30, they would have to pay out of pocket, or any tips they'd have to pay out of pocket. But then PACE again subsidizes that $28, the balance of the $30 ride.
Okay. Thank you for that. So so if somebody with the wheelchair, that's the traditional one where the PACE bus would come out and get them on the wheelchair, and then they would pay.
A lot of the taxis now are also accessible, and there's a phone number that you can call to book an accessible taxi if they wanted to use the Taxi Access Program. And Userve is also more accessible than the traditional Uber program, which is why Userve has been selected as one of the rideshare companies to use.
All right. Thank you.
I think the other sort of nuance to that is they have to be ADA certified to apply to participate in any of the programs, but the rider themselves get to can self-select. Like we can't force, PACE doesn't force anyone into either the RAP or the TAP program, but if they choose to want to participate in that, they register and they can self-select for one of those other more, in some cases, more flexible services.
Director Kutark. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Gavin has been patiently waiting.
Do you have a projected ridership number for the 2025 budget and a projected amount of the shortfall for 2025?
So the 2025 budget was assumed 4.6 million rides on ADA, which is actually lower than where we actually finished up in 2024. So a limitation of our budget process is the timeline is fairly long from May or June to December. PACE had very limited data on the ramp launch at the time they were developing the 25 budget. So that's simply why it was set too low. We hadn't seen the full impact of that new service yet. Regarding the shortfall, as Sarah showed, we had a $4 million shortfall for ADA through the first quarter. If you were to simply annualize that, it would be $16 million. Now, it may or may not end up being there, but that would be our data point, that first quarter shortfall annualized. Something in that order of magnitude.
Which is why we're just sort of connect the dots, which is why we're suggesting we need to, we've already started doing some of this analysis around what that action plan could look like, and wanting to get a jump on that, if you will, before we even do a budget amendment. So we recognize there's probably going to have to be a budget amendment, but we don't want to wait till the middle of the year to be trying, or post the middle of the year to be trying to tweak or make changes and move sort of other programmatic changes that might have a more positive outcome on this deficit. So that's why we're trying to sort of advance that work even in advance of an actual budget amendment.
Thank you.
Director Kutark.
I'd like to follow up on the director's point here is that it sounds like with a 16% or 660,000 ride miss, the forecasting and the modeling of the demand is an important exercise here. And in the safety plan, I'd be interested if we can look at how that was done and how we might change that in the future. also would encourage you looking at scenarios of what changes to the plans might do to the demand and the ridership. So if it's more on the shuttle day of, less of that, what are those dynamics I think are important? And the cost of each of those different scenarios, if you were to push more rides to one or to the other, I think we certainly, this experience we're living through seems to necessitate getting that right and getting it better.
Director Mondero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to what Executive Director Redden mentioned, that we can't compel someone to choose the taxi versus the Uber. I'm just going back to what Director Colson mentioned, like our requirement, which we all agree with, is to provide reasonable rides. So why is that a federal requirement, and how, but can you elaborate on how the feds have set it up? And has there ever been a discussion with anyone at the federal level about tweaking that rule? And then let me just ask my couple questions so that you could kind of answer it all comprehensively. The second aspect is that if traditional paced paratransit costs so much, I think you mentioned last month, Leanne, that we had just renewed the contracts and everything became more expensive. How many vendors are there? And have we thought of just having an open procurement so that we could always just be inviting more people, more contractors to come and potentially get certified to potentially lower that cost? Any one of you. Thanks.
So federal regulations, we'll start there for the program. So there is regulations in terms of the driver training and the drug and alcohol testing, and all of that is required for paratransit operators. So that's not something that usually can happen with taxi drivers and Uber or Userve. So that's one reason. The federal guidelines only include the traditional ADA paratransit is approved as an ADA paratransit ride. All these other rides that would be like a ride share access program or a TAP have to be programs that people opt into to use those. So we can't just automatically shift people to a cab or a taxi by federal regulations. They have to sign on to want to use those modes, which often are more convenient for the rider, and that's why they choose to go that direction. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, and one of the sort of the policy things that is already in place. I mean, these are new evolutions in this ADA space, and we have had conversations at the federal level. It's a conversation that's continuing to happen across transit agencies about how we can evolve. I mean, several years back, they couldn't even set these kinds of programs up. So that's been an evolution in sort of some of the federal guidance around how they can incorporate some of these things. But we can't, like we said, legally require someone to take a RAP or a TAP trip. One of the policy ways that PACE set this up to try to incent a cheaper trip for those who want to opt in beyond the flexibility of those more of a traditional rideshare Uber type ride, is the fact that they are pricing at a cheaper price point than even the copay or the individual fare payment on traditional ADA is $3, I think it's at right now, and it's $2 right now on the RAP side of things. So again, that's a way to sort of try to incent people to move over or consider it for their trips. But I think that all these things are kind of on the table in terms of this action plan. So there's the sort of the financial analysis that Director Katarik was talking about is absolutely a key thing on how we how the budget projections are developed, modeling out different scenarios for some of these programs. Also talking to our peers around the country who are doing things. So it's not just looking in our own backyard, but looking to see what trends and changes are happening and are there better practices that we could also incorporate in. There's broader fair policy things that we can take even beyond just this price differential between the ADA, traditional ADA, paratransit, and these rideshare programs. As an example, is opening up anyone who's ADA certified to be able to utilize the fixed route services for free, for example. So while some people might initially say, oh, that's a lost cost because we're going to lose revenue in that space, it's significantly less loss, if that makes sense, than a $70+ paratransit trip. Now, it's not going to, again, we can't force anybody to do that because of the federal regulations around ADA. But we can continue to create policies around in both in pricing and other things to sort of incent people to consider all or some of their trips in that more traditional fixed route space, coupled with the ongoing investment that the three service boards are making on further increasing their accessibility, their physical accessibility across their systems. And it's not, I mean, all the vehicles are technically accessible, but, you know, sometimes stations and elevators and those kinds of elements, curb cuts don't always exist. So we can't force anybody into some of those other services, but we can create policy and sort of programmatic changes that help move the needle in some of that. So it's all on the table, which is why, you know, we gave you some previews of some of the analysis we did last month even, and we're continuing to work through that with PACE, both on the certification side of who are we certifying and how are we certifying and the criteria, as well as sort of the program offerings that are out there.
Any other questions or comments? I'm always curious whether we're getting older, as I think we are as a population. Hopefully, we're not getting sicker or poorer, but clearly age and the aging population has a huge, huge impact here. And then the other thing on ADA paratransit is if we were, and hopefully we will never come to this, where we have to start planning for 40% cuts, that clearly would change probably the scope of, because there's requirements, we provide that service where we provide regular service. That's going to have a major impact. But hopefully we never get to that planning process. ADA paratransit, very, very difficult population to oversee. It's not easy. You know, I think just by the fact that our region has really given this to PACE to perform shows that the CTA knew how difficult it was. And, you know, it's a very difficult population to manage, but I want to get to the bottom of why we, you know, we're not as accurate as we probably should have been. But thank you very much. So we need, if there's no more questions or comments, need a motion and a second to approve this item. Director Gavin moves we approve, seconded by Director Carey. And with that, Joey, please take a roll call
Sure.
on 7B.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Aye.
Director Gorman? Director Groven? Sorry, Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Jenkins?
Aye.
Director Katark?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Madero?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Rotondo?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Sager? Director Yonan?
Aye.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
Oh, we have 13 ayes.
Thank you. And 7B is approved. Thank you, gentlemen. Item 7C through 7E, as they are on our agenda, are the approval of the contract and expenditure items as they appear in our packet. And these items are 7C, an ordinance authorizing a contract for RTA Fair Programs Administration, and Michael Vandercreek is around if there are questions on that. Item 7D is an ordinance authorizing the purchase of excess liability insurance policies by the RTA Loss Financing Plan and Joint Self-Insurance Fund. And Allison Novak, our legal counsel, and Aon are available for a discussion on 7D, you know, the excess liability insurance we have. And 7E is the approval of whatever travel expense reimbursements are in your board packet. Any questions on any of these three? Other than insurance gets a little more expensive, I guess is the way to put it, after having talked to Allison on this topic. So how about a motion to approve 7C through 7E? Director Ross moves that we approve these items. Is there a second? Second by Director Yonan. And on that, Joy, you want to take the roll on 7C, D, and E?
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Aye.
Dr. Gorman,
Aye.
Dr. Groven,
Aye.
Dr. Jenkins. I'll come back. Dr. Katarik,
Aye.
Dr. Lewis, Dr. Madero,
Yes.
Dr. Pang,
Yes.
Dr. Rotundo,
Yes.
Dr. Ross,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Dr. Sagar, Dr. Yonan,
Aye.
Chairman Dillard,
Yes.
and I'll come back to Director Jenkins.
Yes, aye.
Thank you. 14
Thank you,
ayes.
Natasha. And those three items are approved. Item 8 is new business. Any new business to come before us, today? Our next meeting will be, June 12th, 2025. We'll see where we stand in the world of mass transit reform and financing, on that date. Any further business to come before the public session of the Board of Directors? Director Gorman?
On 7B, I was out. Can I
Yeah.
be recorded as aye?
Thank you. Leave is granted. Thank you. All right. June 12th, 2025, 9 a.m. Is our next hearing, and we'll see what changes, if any, there are in our world at that time. If there's no further business to come before the RTA this morning, how about a motion and a second to adjourn? Director Groven moves that we adjourn, seconded by Director Nora K. Ryan. And with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And the ayes have it, and we are adjourned.